All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. I appreciate your presence, and thanks for supporting the Crosse event. And Jackie, thank you for being here too. So with us tonight, we've got Steve Salisbury. He is a global change leader expert for some of the world's most recognizable enterprises. For over 30 years, Steve has profitably facilitated strategic transformations, resulting in significant bottom line results for his clients. In an industry where projects only succeed at a rate of 30%, Steve's success rate exceeds 80%. He shares lessons from his corporate career working on some of the most well-known changes at Whirlpool Corporation. In addition to experiences working with major clients, clients of Steve Salisbury Consulting include Johnson & Johnson, John Deere, Lowe's, Allstate, Nike, AbbVie, and others. So, Steve, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you. It's great to be with you this evening. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you what is one of my proudest accomplishments, and that is the project we're going to talk about tonight when Whirlpool acquired Maytag. Now, this was a few years ago, but it still remains, I think, a pretty significant success as projects go overall. As we get started tonight, I'd like to, since you guys forewent, is that a word? Forewent? You forewent the trivia, I have a couple. All right. In what country is the largest washing machine factory in the world? In what country? China.
Germany.
Germany.
India.
India, good guess. Any other guesses?
Mexico.
Mexico, another great guess. Any other guesses?
U.S.?
The United States of America. It is actually in the United States. Believe it or not, it's in the United States. Bonus question, in what state?
Indiana.
Indiana, good guess.
Illinois.
Illinois. Another good guess. Pardon? I'm sorry?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin?
Michigan.
Michigan? That would be, you would think, right? Whirlpool's headquartered there. No. Ohio. Ohio. Okay, last bonus question. How many million square feet? All right, and I'll help you out with this one. So you think it's 500,000?
Of what? Manufacturing space?
Square feet of manufacturing space, yes. 500,000? 3 million? I'm sorry? 94 million? Wow, that'd be big. 3?
Go big or go home, right?
Go big or go home, right. The answer is 1.5 million. And, you know, I don't know about you, but it's a little hard for me to put my head around 1.5 million square feet. It's 35 acres. That's a little easier for me to figure out. Pardon? Yeah, 35 acres, under one roof, on one floor. All right, so just to show you that I wasn't goofing with you here, let's see if we can make this work. Oops. Uh-oh, where's the sound? It played earlier. All right. Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. Well, hang on.
Nope, that's background music again.
All right, we can forego this.
Shoot. There you go.
It is a bill of appliances for today's lifestyle. And what do we buy them?
Oops. Okay. How do we turn the background
Ready?
music off? There we go. Okay.
There we go.
American pride is alive and well in Clyde, Ohio. This small town is home to about 6,000 residents who live, work, and raise their families here. And this area has also been at the heart of American manufacturing since the late 19th century. Clyde is home to the largest washing machine factory in the world, where 3,500 people work every day to make quality Maytag Centennial, Bravos, Bravos X, and the new front-loading Maxima washers that are then shipped to homes across the United States. It's where the magic happens. For nearly 6 decades, the plant in Clyde has been building washing machines. The plant continues to grow and to be upgraded to build appliances for today's lifestyles. It's 1.5 million square feet. It's the largest factory in the world that makes washing machines. And folks at the Clyde plant stay here for a long time. Not to mention, there are families who have been building washing machines for multiple generations.
25 years, 47 years, 37 years, 22 years.
That's a lot of years. And we couldn't provide you with dependable Maytag appliances without all of these dependable employees. In a town with a population of just 6,000, this plant plays an important role in the community. Or if you look at it another way, our community here in the plant is a big piece of the larger community outside our doors. From Ohio to your home, these Maytag washers are built with pride and strength, so you get years of great service.
So the last trivia question is, who's the guy in the blue suit? It's you. Exactly. Exactly. All right. So that was a little fun. And so just to be clear, that plant builds not just Maytag washing machines, but it builds Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Amana, and until very recently, Kenmore. I don't know if you saw the news, it was about early last week, but the 100-year relationship between Sears and Whirlpool broke. So we are no longer their largest supplier, and they're no longer our largest customer. Actually, they haven't been Whirlpool's largest customer for a long time. But that's another story for another day. So let's talk about the acquisition of Maytag. So Whirlpool acquired Maytag for a number of reasons. One of them was, of course, they wanted to maintain a competitive force in an increasingly global competitive environment. It's really tough out there in the appliance industry. These are near commodity products, and companies like LG and Samsung are eating their corporate lunch, so to speak. It's very difficult for them. Plus, they saw Maytag as a very well-known brand. We all know the Lonely Repairman. He's been around for decades, and it's almost iconic. And so there was a lot of brand recognition that Whirlpool wanted to capitalize. And I think finally they recognized, the leadership of Whirlpool recognized that here was an opportunity to leverage decades of consumer data and innovation across still another brand that we would ultimately end up adding to our portfolio, which gives our customers a lot more choices. So that's a little bit about why. Now the integration master plan looked a little bit like this. And what we're going to talk today about is the appliance sales and distribution integration. That was a business process and system integration project. But there were other elements of the integration. So the whole thing didn't happen in 7 months, right? It was a two to 3 year project to integrate both companies. But the largest and most complex part of that was that first bubble, which is what we're going to talk about today, and that was bringing together the sales and distribution of Maytag appliances over into Whirlpool's operating environment. Okay, so I'm not an IT guy, but this was somewhat of an IT project, right? Maytag had legacy systems that went back, you know, the old green screen COBOL mainframe based stuff for those of you who might remember that. And Whirlpool had several years earlier implemented SAP. And so we were bringing all that Maytag business out of that legacy environment into Whirlpool's SAP environment. But this was very much a business process project, right? Let's not get too tangled up in the technology. It was important, but very much a business systems and process project because you know, we had to move all this transactional activity that was going on. All right, so to frame this just a little bit further, what I want to introduce to you here is what I call the program management trifecta. And based on the experiences that I've had with this project as well as many others in my career, what I've found is that these three things really make a big difference to the success of a program. One is to have a very well-structured, highly disciplined project management office, or PMO, something I'm sure you are all pretty familiar with. Another is to have a structured change management approach. And that was actually my accountability on this particular project. And then finally, in some way, figuring out how to integrate the different functions across the organization as they were going through this change. Okay, and what I found is if you don't have these things, you end up with some issues. Like if you don't have a PMO, you end up wandering, right? If you don't have change management, you reduce the value. If you don't have cross-functional integration, then you have what I call cross-functional dysfunction. And we'll talk about each of those. All right. So the first element of that trifecta is this highly structured PMO with links back up to the, in this case it was to the CEO. So I have a question. I have a question for the group. Question for the group. So how critical, this is an easy one for this group, how critical to the success of a project do you think a highly structured PMO is? How critical? Pretty high. Yeah, it's a gimme. Right? Does anybody think it's not important? All right. All right. Yeah, we think it's pretty important. Okay, so back to the trifecta. If you don't have that structured PMO, and I'm sure you can relate to this, right? You have what I call this wandering ramble. You have scope creep. I'm sure we've all dealt with that. Scope creep. You have false start, missed deadlines, mixed messages, and a frustrated team because they don't really know what the expectations are or when they're required and who's requiring them and that sort of thing. So it's important to have a structured PMO to help drive success in the project. All right, so we're going to do a quick exercise by table. And what I'd like you to do is describe the features of a PMO for a project that you're currently working on or one that you've recently been involved with. And what I'd like to understand are the features that are positive and those features that are suboptimal. So take 1 minute, literally 1 minute, each table, talk about that quickly, and we'll ask for a couple of report outs. Clear? One positive, one suboptimal feature of a PMO. Go. Okay. When you're walking through there, your head is always between me and the screen. Okay. So, if you want me to move now, I can't go over there. I'll go over there. Okay. Okay.
At times it's effective. Sometimes it isn't. I can't really see what they're looking at,
Okay.
but I just want to.
Yep. No, that's good. I'll go over there.
Well, it's access where you have priorities that are named, but there are conflicts amongst the resources and there's some project management and who knows what else. It's just not very well coordinated.
All right, 1 minute. Who would like to share an observation? So what have you done that's been really effective?
Standardized processes.
Standardized project management processes. Yep. Yeah, that's a good one. Any other pluses?
Well, we didn't actually talk about this at our table, but Laura and I both run projects sometimes simultaneously, side by side. And by being aware of the amount of change our organization can handle at any given point in time, we can organize how quickly those things roll out to make it digestible for the organization and make resources available.
Yeah, that's a good one. Resource planning. That came up at noon today when we had this discussion in Rochester. So yeah, that's good. How about on the flip side? What could be better?
Well, we thought standardization as a positive, but it also could be, an overkill on smaller projects. So.
Yes. Yeah, too much bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. You have to scale it with this project, don't you? Other thoughts on this one?
I said reporting and data gathering. Sometimes they want all these data and metrics and reports, but if nobody's looking at them or using them to make business decisions, then why are they doing it?
Exactly. So Jackie's comment was unnecessary reporting, basically, or underused reporting, right? Again, kind of gets back to that bureaucracy. Why are we doing this, right? We're actually going to address that in the next couple of slides. So today, from a PMO perspective, what I'm going to share with you is first how we structured this project and linked it back up to the CEO. Some of the work we did around planning in the areas we really focused on, and then some information about reporting that we used that we thought was very effective. All right, so this was essentially the project management structure for the project for the business systems integration project, right? And I'll start from the bottom just to kind of explain how this worked. Just quickly, we had functional teams in each of the functional areas. Okay, so let's back up a step. We were integrating Maytag's transactional processing of orders basically into Whirlpool system. That means we were impacting sales, order management, supply chain planning, distribution, warehousing, transportation, accounts receivable, and a few other functions along the way. So in every one of those functions, we had a functional team with a functional team leader, business project manager, who was responsible for that function's integration from Maytag to Whirlpool. Also, at that functional team level, we had a plethora of IT folks that were assigned to these various teams, as well as we had people on my team, people acting as change agents that worked with each of the functional teams. Those functional project teams reported up to this PMI or PMO. I'll refer to it both ways here today. At Whirlpool, we called it a PMI, Program Management Integration Team. But this was a group that met every week to track the progress of the project. And in that meeting were these functional team leaders, so the business project managers for each of the functions, the functional head, okay, the vice president of that area. Then we had IT well represented. I was actually in this meeting every week with this leadership team. And then we had the vice president of business and systems integration. I mean, it was really his job to make sure this all happened. He was the leader of this project. From there, it went up. There was an integration steering committee at the North American executive team level. Again, for context, Maytag was essentially a U.S. company. They had some international business, but it was really a U.S. company. Whereas Whirlpool was and still is a very global company. So it really only impacted the North American part of our business, Whirlpool's business. So that integration steering committee met every other week to talk about issues and progress and bring more visibility to the project and that sort of thing. And then on a monthly basis, they reported up to the CEO and again with key players in the room. And the three functions that had the greatest impact were sales, supply chain, and finance. So they were in the room with the leaders to talk about progress and that sort of thing. So pretty disciplined structure that we had in place to make this happen. And I'll be referring back to this as we go through the discussion tonight. The other thing that we put in place was some very detailed planning. Now this is a very high level view of that, but I would share two things with you. One is that the planning for this started even before the DOJ said go. The Department of Justice approved this acquisition on March 30th. We actually started planning in October, like 6 months before, on what it was that we needed to do and how we were going to do it, because we knew that speed was really going to be critical to make this successful. The other thing we did in terms of the overall project planning is that we really focused on three key tracks, if you will. One, of course, was each functional track. Each function had to have its own plan and what they were going to do to meet the requirements of their own integration. Right? But beyond that, we also had a track on cross-functional activities, because we recognized that in order to be successful with this, each function had to be clear on what it was going to do, but they had to be clear with each other. Each function had to be clear with each other on what was going to happen, right? So we put a lot of effort in this cross-functional planning, and that's one whole leg of the trifecta, so we'll spend a lot more time talking about that. And then finally, we actually planned out the dates for key decision points that executives would need to be involved in order to achieve this go live in 7 months. And so for an example, the integration leadership team, that North American executive team, had to decide on October 10th whether or not this thing was going to go live or not on the 28th. And we planned that months in advance. So a lot of focus on planning. And then the last thing we did from a program management office is we put these scorecards in place. We eliminated sort of the standard progress reporting that plagues us as project managers, right? And we went to this reasonably simple format. Now, I know it's a bit of an eye chart, but I've got this here for you to get an idea of what we did. In the handouts that we'll provide after tonight, you'll get to see the whole, basically the whole enchilada. So very simply, these were functions down the left, and then key checkpoints across the top, things that we were looking at to make sure they were getting done. So things like making sure we had the right business requirements, making sure we had a communication plan, a training plan, that testing was taken care of, that we had some effort around quality assurance, and then go live with security and that sort of thing. So you can see, fortunately, lots of green up there. This isn't made up. This is true. Lots of green, few yellows, and I think it's worth just taking a minute to tell you how we dealt with the yellows. And you don't see any red either, right? How we dealt with the yellows was in that PMI, PMO, right? If there was something that was behind, we would bring the business project manager into the meeting and talk about, okay, what's going on and what can we do to help you mitigate this risk, right? Nobody ever got chastised for going yellow, right? In fact, the opposite would happen. If you didn't, if you didn't come forward with problems, that would be an issue. So, so that worked out really well. And then the other thing we did is we had this go, no-go decision, and this was what we used at that October 10th meeting, right? In fact, this one is dated October 10th. And again, similar idea, functions down the left, and then key criteria across the top, and where we were with each of those, and where we might need help. Again, looking at key criteria there. Okay? So when we talk about your point, Jackie, about bureaucratic project status reporting, we didn't have any of that. We used this. This was our reporting. And we brought this to that PMO every week, that PMI, PMO every week, and talked about our progress and where we had challenges.
So it was updated real time?
Yes, it was updated. So those meetings were on Tuesday morning. First thing Tuesday morning. This was updated on Monday. And brought to that leadership team. Yep. All right. Okay. So the next leg of the trifecta is having a well-defined change management structure. This is probably where it's going to get a little more interesting for you, because that first section, you guys know all this, right? You know all this. There'll be some more new and better stuff here for you. So another question for the audience here, for the group. Of all project failures, what percent are attributed to people issues? And let me define that just really quickly. When I say people issues, I'm talking about things like sponsorship, leadership alignment, awareness, communication, engagement, things related to bringing the folks along, right? What percent of project failures are attributed to people issues? All of them, 90, 20? It's higher than 20. Any other guesses? So a company by the name of Benchmarking Partners did a survey, I think it's not been quite 2 years ago, 62%. So that's like 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 failures are attributed to people issues. I love that, because it makes change management, it kind of helps make the case for change management and why you need it. So what I have found, when you don't have a really well-defined change management process or a structured approach to change management, you end up with reduced value, right? Disengaged employees, they don't know what's going on. They don't know what the expectations are, or they're not clear, right? Therefore, you have implementation issues and delays, right? And it's unsustainable. When that project management structure that we talked about 3 or 4 slides ago goes away after the project is done, who's left to run the business? The folks. And if they're not brought along, you can't sustain it. You just can't sustain it, right? So I think this is vitally important. All right, another exercise. By table, choose a current or recent project that you've been involved with, and talk about change management areas where you could benefit from some more, from some additional focus. And I'll take just a quick second to describe these so you know what they are. So active and visible sponsorship. You have somebody in a senior leadership position who's out there talking about this project with the folks, right? And then holding the project teams accountable for delivery. Those are what I think are the two big things that executives need to do. Leadership alignment. How many times you've been involved in an activity where you hear different leaders saying different things about, Laura's smiling, different leaders saying different things about what's happening with the project. Leadership alignment, vitally important. Organizational development, this is really about role changes. Oftentimes projects will cause jobs to change, right? Somebody needs to figure that out. It's usually the change guy. Employee engagement, what are you doing to bring the folks along? Or better yet, what are you doing to have the employees actually drive the change? And we'll talk more about that. And then finally, communication and training. I think a lot of times change management is thought of as two things, and it's those two bottom cells. And it's really a lot more. In fact, I maintain that if you don't do the stuff at the top, the four at the top, the bottom two aren't really going to work. You really need to put effort on those other, especially the sponsorship and leadership alignment bucket. All right, so back to the exercise. 1 minute, pick a project, current or recent. Where could you benefit from more change management? Go. Okay, 1 minute. Actually, it's 1:10. Who'd like to share an observation?
Well, we talked at this table about active and visible sponsorship would be very helpful. We have, in my particular case, the project team knows the importance of the project, but I feel like I'm the one that's driving that point home, and having the actual sponsors, the people who are, in the actual reporting structure. 'Cause I'm just the project manager. I don't have any say over their careers. They need to be out on the floor in the project team.
Exactly. Yes. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's good. I think you were starting to say something.
So we have the same, the visible sponsorship as, we're trudging along and going with this project, but sometimes we need a cheerleader and they need to say, here we are,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe they're just, we didn't know if it was because they were too busy or if they want to stay a little hidden because if the project goes bad, because of projects aren't known to be terribly successful. They don't need the finger at them. The other one was, it's true, right?
Yeah.
Employee engagement is another one that we thought would be beneficial. Yeah.
Just getting the people who are kind of in the trenches involved in the planning and the implementation, because otherwise you overlook important features and important work that you wouldn't know about without getting that.
Right.
engaged.
Yes, exactly. So Pam, you said something about sometimes executives want to hide, right?
Well, sometimes they're not as visible for many reasons.
Right.
It could be hiding, it could be they're too busy, I don't know.
Right. Oh, that's what you said, sorry. Too busy. So what I've told senior executives is this. So it's important enough for you to spend money, but not time? Wait. that doesn't make sense. If you're going to approve the budget, you ought to like make sure your investment is working for you, right? So, yeah, good. And I liked your comments about employee engagement, really important. Okay, we'll give you guys a chance, really quick. Anything you'd like to add?
We kind of had the same thing. One thing we talked about was the active and visible sponsorship constantly changing. And so then project manager has to come in, use their change management to then re-engage that team, get them rowing in the same direction to then support the project and carry forward. So changes within that active leadership and then making sure that they're absorbing what needs to be absorbed and then carrying that torch forward.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Good observation. All right. So we did a number of things from a change management perspective to help make this successful. I'll share 4 with you. We had a change management office that was structured to kind of fit the PMO structure that we talked about earlier. We had a change management approach, call it a methodology if you like. I try to stay away from that M word. But it was essentially a methodology or approach that we used that put a lot of emphasis on discovery, and we'll talk about that. Project planning, of course, tied to key activities, and then detail reporting at a person level. Okay? Again, there's that report word, right? So this change management structure, I'll just touch on briefly. Basically, so I was the lead, okay? And I had 3 people sort of in staff roles driving the communication training, and then I had a project administrator basically that was helping me with the reporting. What's really important about this slide is the right side, because I had 4 change agents, not just 3, I had 4 change agents who were assigned to those different functions. Right, so I had 1 change agent that was assigned to all of the supply chain functions. I had another change agent that was assigned to finance, and on and on. But the key here was what their role was. What they did, what those change agents did, is they worked with the functional business leaders to, number 1, understand what was changing, that discovery work, what was changing, and then how to use that information in the subsequent planning for communication, for training, for engagement, and that sort of thing. So a very important role, and you know, it was somewhat matrixed. So each of those change agents actually ran through this process or this approach with each of their functional business project leads. And you know, it's a bit of an eye chart, but you can see up at the top in the concept phase, the planning phase, so it's basically planning, design, development, and then go live. But some pretty significant focus on the discovery, right? So what needs to happen? What's the current state? What's the future state? Who are the stakeholders, and what is the impact on them going to be? And an example of one of the outputs was this change definition. Now this was for finance, and this is kind of at a summary level, but this is an actual document that we created in the finance organization showing the current state, the future state, and then what we had to do in the middle there to prepare the organization for the change. And again, this will be in the materials I share with you. This exercise was one of the things that I think made it so we could move so fast. You know, we actually made people think through what's going to be different and how we're going to achieve that.
It's like the COBOL to SAP.
Right, right. I mean, so you're not going to see, you might see a little bit of technical reference here, but a lot of this is process-based, right? There's a lot of stuff going on in Excel. Well, how are we going to deal with that, right?
Was this once set in stone? Once you decided on the transition state, I mean, how editable was this document? Was it editable throughout the whole project, or did you make a decision to stick with it?
Well, again, we were moving at light speed,
yeah.
So there wasn't a lot of dancing around this stuff, sure. Right? Now, That said, you have to be flexible, and when things come up, you got to deal with it. But once these were put together, we used them, and we didn't really go back and use them again.
Your scope creep could happen.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
I forgot this, or I forgot
Right,
that, right?
right.
Did you keep all the same SKUs?
Oh, that's a great question. Did we keep all the same SKUs? Initially, yes. Over time, that changed. But yeah, initially. All right. The planning, again, planning's important. I know I'm preaching to the choir on that. But the planning in the area of change really focused on 4 areas. Number one, around that discovery, right? The discovery piece that we just talked about. And then, of course, communication and training. And then feedback. So it was very important for us to obtain feedback as we went through this. And one of my favorite examples of this is that the senior VP of supply chain, probably starting in August. So this went live October 28th. So starting in August, maybe 10 weeks before go live, every week he brought his entire organization together and had a conversation. Right? So a lot of times it was at lunchtime, but every week he'd have 1 or 2 slides that talked about status. Then he'd open it up. How's it going?
How many people was that?
In the corporate office?
Did he bring together?
Yeah, it was. No, not every. Attendance was a mandatory. We had about 200 people in the corporate office. All right. And the few I attended, there were 50 or 60 people in the room. So a lot of it was very open-ended. How's it going? What kind of issues you running into? What do you think? What do I need to be concerned about? As the VP, he was masterful at that. I wish he was involved in every project I did. It was really good. So again, a lot of focus on planning, and then finally, detail at the person level on, in this case, the amount of training that we did. So this was a training report that we published every week. This was just before go live, week ending 10/27. Go live was on the 28th. We trained nearly 3,200 people, almost 26,000 hours of training in 6 weeks. Yeah, holy cow. That was huge. And do the math, it's about 8 hours a piece, right? Which is about what it takes to figure out how to at least start doing your new job. This, and again, back to your point, Jackie, early on, this got a lot of visibility. In fact, this report went to the CEO, this version of it. He didn't see this every week, but he saw this one because it was the day before go live, right? So again, a lot of detail. So I think the takeaway, here it is. Hello. Technology. A little slow on the response time there. All right, so the key elements. Again, structured change management approach with people deployed in the right areas to make this work. Lots of focus on discovery, an overall plan that was integrated, an overall change management plan that was integrated with the overall project plan, and then this detailed reporting at the person level. Why is it important? Employees are fully engaged. I heard that a couple of times. That's important. People knew what was going on. That go live was one of the most well-communicated go lives, I think, in the history of the company. Everybody knew exactly what was going to happen every hour, leading up to, and then in the few hours after we, quote, flipped the switch. Right? The sponsors were actively engaged. I talked about Brian, the Senior Vice President of Supply Chain, and it was very sustainable. We had very few issues after go live. Very few. In fact, I would call them minor speed bumps, it was pretty successful. Not completely because of change management, but certainly we had a role in that. All right, the last leg of the trifecta is the need for mitigating cross-functional dysfunction, or doing something around cross-functional integration. So another question for the group. Harvard Business Review about 2 years ago did a study to determine how many cross-functional teams were dysfunctional. What do you think the percent was? How many cross-functional teams are dysfunctional?
75.
What did you say?
I said 75.
That is exactly the right number, 75%. Yeah, you've been reading Harvard. Yeah, there you go.
But that one I don't remember.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you just Google cross-functional dysfunction, maybe Harvard, you can find that article. So, in my experience dealing with organizations that are trying to implement cross-functional plan change, if you're not doing something to address the need for cross-functional integration, if you're not doing something to get people in different functions to work together effectively, you're going to end up with cross-functional dysfunction. Conflicting priorities, misaligned requirements, lacking cooperation, and my favorite, political positioning, right? Because when things aren't going well, you know that those folks, whoever they are, they need to protect themselves, right? And it's human nature, right? It's human nature. So, yeah, and I've seen this more than once. Fortunately, we mitigated it with this project, and we'll talk about how in a minute. But before we do, last and final exercise, think about a project that you're currently working on or one that you've recently been involved with, and talk about what you're trying to do or what you might need to do more of to eliminate cross-functional dysfunction. Any questions? Go. 1 minute. Go.
Cog in the wheel, and how do I get it done? So what would that
I still think for some of the activities that are closer to the, you need to have sort of like a goal history and an interpreter, because even just the terms they address things
So getting him.
Okay. 1.5 minutes. Okay. What do you think? Where have you seen this, and what do you think you could use some help with dealing with in terms of cross-functional dysfunction? Is that too vague, that question?
I don't know if I'm on the same path with you. With what I've been working on, whether it's a project or whatever you're working on, if you don't have one compelling, aligned vision that everybody's working on, then all of this happens. So everybody's got a different idea of what the goal is.
Right, exactly.
You need a common, purposeful goal that everybody says, yep, that's it.
So that's probably at a broader level than we're going to talk about specifically with regards to this project. But related to that point with this project, it was really clear. This was number one. And making this successful was like the ultimate goal. It was very clear outcomes-based vision. Now we'll get into the gory details of how we did that here. But that's a really good point. Other observations?
Yeah, it's kind of like a mix of the bottom two, where there's like a lack of caring about anything outside of their scope of work. So just getting them to think outside of their department and add value to the team versus just saying, just tell me how to fix me.
Right, exactly. Yes, so getting folks to think about outside their particular work area, their particular function, right? And I think that's a great segue for what we did here. We put some structure around having those conversations. Any other thoughts maybe from the other table? None is okay. You guys good? Okay, all right. So we did two things that I think made a really big difference in this project. One is that we brought together the functions in a room, and we talked about what was going to change in each of the areas and how it was going to affect each other, right? And then the other thing we did is at that PMI, PMO level, we had each function in the weeks leading up to go live, we had each function come in and talk about what was going to be different in their area and how that was going to impact the folks around them. And when you had all those executives in the room, they're like, oh yeah, so I guess I better go back and talk to my folks about this, right? So we sort of mitigated those cross-functional dysfunction. We mitigated that with those two things. And just to dig into a little bit more detail, so I'll never forget that first cross-functional meeting we had. We had every function represented. The business project manager for that function was in the room. The business executive for that function was in the room. All of the IT folks that were supporting those functions were in the room. The vice president that was responsible for the overall project facilitated the meeting. It wasn't a project manager. And the change team was in the room because we needed to hear what was going on from a communication perspective. We asked them, just to hit the highlights, we asked them to prepare, we'll look at this kind of this, well, the second, third, and fourth, or sorry, third, fourth, and fifth bullet. What's going to be different? We asked each business project manager to define what's going to be different. Remember the chart we talked about earlier, the current state, future state? That came in handy here. What's going to be different? What's going to be different for the Maytag Heritage folks? What's going to be different for the Whirlpool Heritage folks? Because they were still two companies. And then identify the impact that your process change is going to have on upstream and downstream functions. So if you're order management, what's the impact you're going to have on sales? What's the impact you're going to have on distribution? What's the impact you're going to have on accounts receivable? At least that you think you're going to have. And then, conversely, what do you need from those other functions, right? So I'm in order management. I need to know that, I don't know, make something up. I need to know that orders are coming in and that they're either Maytag orders that need to get filled from a Maytag warehouse or they're Whirlpool orders that need to get filled from a Whirlpool warehouse. I need to know that. So I need the sales folks to flag that for me, that sort of thing. The outcomes, you know, I think this was clearly a big win for us. This meeting was a big win. We had 70 people in the room for a full day, and they walked out of there with a very much a deeper understanding of their impacts on one another and what that translated to. It really helped energize the team. I mean, you know, this was a lot of work in a short period of time. And having the opportunity to commiserate a bit with their peers was really a very healthy thing. And we had a clear list of next steps with accountabilities, and this is just a partial list of the issues and risks that came out of that meeting. And we put people's names on these, and we reviewed this list every week in the PMI, PMO, until they were all wrangled to the ground. Okay? And there's about 7 or 8 here. I think there were only 30, which actually isn't so bad when you think about 70 people being in the room and as big as this project was, right? And then the other thing we did, and that I referred to at the beginning of this segment, was that we did these process reviews, and this is only one slide of maybe 6 or 8, but we did process reviews of each of the functions in the PMI, PMO, PMI. So each of the functional business leaders would prepare a short presentation about what was going to be different immediately after go live. Go live was October 28th. This was October 30th. What's life going to be like in the area of order management? And you know, I'm not an IT guy. I'm not really an order processing guy, but you can kind of get a feel here for the kind of discussion they had about. Even though this is one system, there were going to have to be 2 delivery documents, one for each set of brands, if you will, and which resulted in 2 invoices, and you know, they talked through what the implications of that were.
That's just finished goods for sales orders. What about purchase orders?
That was a different integration.
Okay.
That was a different integration. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. This was all focused on appliance sales and distribution. Not, great question though. Okay, so those 2 things, so those 2 things, those cross-functional meetings and those process reviews really added a lot to the discussion. And you'll notice, the other thing I'll say is you'll notice that these were business discussions. There were IT people in the room, and they added to it, but these were business process discussions. These weren't systems discussions. Okay. So there you have it. A well-structured PMO, a structured approach to change management, and mitigating the risks associated with cross-functional integration. Those 3 things really made a big difference. I'll open it up for any remaining questions.
Steve, how many people were on the whole project, the whole program? There were 70 people in that one meeting. How many people do you think were involved as part of the project? So
I don't know the answer to that question. I would make an educated guess based on the complexity. And the 70 people in the room, probably a third of those were leadership, which you need to have them involved. But if you're talking about like project team members, like in each of the functions, it's probably close to 200. Probably close to maybe a little more, 200 to 250.
So obviously, because of the kind of project it was, like you said, this is what we're going to do, we're going to do it now, so there's full, complete support with money, muscle, and time, as you say. I mean, you had enough resources to get everything done in line.
Yeah, well.
How did they do role definition? Or was that the roles they played for other projects, so they knew this was just a specific project they were assigned to, like the change agents and those folks? Was that their ongoing role within the company, or is this a role they played for the project they needed to find?
So you're talking about the project team roles.
Yeah.
So I defined all the roles for the change team.
Okay.
And 2 of those 4 change agents, I actually contracted in because we didn't have enough bench strength to do that. And I defined the roles. The 2 that were there helped define the roles because they were there. So for the change team, I basically defined all those roles. So I had a change team, just to expand on that a little bit. There were 5 of us, including me, until this project came along, and I beefed it up to 25. I had 25 people, and now maybe 18 of those were doing training stuff. but yeah, and that was all contract resources. So there was, you mentioned money and resources, you know, my boss said, you go get what you need. Don't worry about the money. We got to get this done.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. He said, it was kind of funny because he said, what are you going to do, spend $500,000?
More.
At the end of the year, I was at about 750. So, yeah. Yep. Other questions?
Can you boil a key takeaway down to like a one statement thing? If you were to just give a nugget?
I have a slide for that.
Okay.
And I can give you the one sentence, but let me include that in the wrap. Other questions?
It sounded like you said that there were project managers for each functional area.
Yes.
Was there one overall that kind of managed the whole endeavor?
Yes. This thing is really slow. I'm going to go over here. I think it's worthwhile just to bounce back here. Why is this so slow? Maybe it's not worth going back. No, that was the change. Wow. Okay, we won't do this again. All right. So Linda's question was there one overall project manager for this? Yes, there were project managers at each of the function levels. So this VP of integration, he was really the overall project manager, quote unquote. Now, Ted, his name was Ted. Ted wasn't dealing with Microsoft Project, and he was truly in an executive project management role, and he had staff that were dealing with the details. But to answer your question, yes, it was his job right there to make sure all those pieces came together. He was the guy that facilitated that cross-functional meeting I talked about. It wasn't somebody down here, it wasn't some PMO analyst, right? Important people, but you need to have that kind of visibility involved. Yes, Roger.
So this is mostly business process oriented project, the nature of this project, and you kind of left the technical parts out. There has to be something pretty significant that happened to bring the technical part together too.
Well, of course.
Projects that you have here, it really would span all of them. Right?
Yeah. So Roger's question was, there had to be a lot of stuff going on in IT to make this happen, right? So actually, I would redo this chart and put these purple boxes. I'd have two sets of purple IT boxes. One here doing the infrastructure stuff that I think you're alluding to, and then IT folks assigned to each of the functions, right? So the heavy lifting from a transaction and business process perspective was done by the IT folks in each of the functions. They reported up to IT, they didn't report to the business function. Right, but to your point, I mean, this was a $12 billion company absorbing a $4 billion company in an SAP environment that was pretty stable, but all of a sudden you needed to have a whole lot more infrastructure to make that work, right? So there were teams that I haven't even alluded to here that were focused on database optimization and hardware capacity and network bandwidth and security and heck, desktop PCs just to make that all happen.
There also had to be a project management process.
Oh yeah, there was.
Put all that together, right?
Yes.
So it wasn't just a bunch of individual IT groups and different functions.
Yes. Yes, it was, there was, and so all of those groups I just mentioned reported up to the Vice President of IT integration, this guy, right? But, so you raise a good question, and it's certainly part of the scope of this project, but I only had 75 minutes. I think, from my perspective, and I see this time and time again as I work with different clients, they put a lot of important effort on that, but they don't put enough effort on the stuff we've talked about tonight. They just don't. They just don't. Maybe one more question?
Would you do it again?
Would I do it again? Absolutely. In fact, I have. Not quite at this scale or speed, but some of these best practices, another great segue to the lesson learned, I've applied those with other projects with different clients, other clients. There's some really great stuff here. Those cross-functional meetings are so powerful. They are so powerful. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about a system project, outsourcing, you know, one project, the project I did for Lowe's was installing a new CIO, so that was purely an organizational change project. We did that kind of stuff there. Different questions, right? But the same kind of underlying fundamental idea about getting people to talk to each other across functions. Yeah, so I would do it again. And I do a few things differently, too. All right, well, great. So to wrap up, oh, geez, we got to go back there. Hang on. Speaking of technology, opportunities, this is really slow. I apologize. Wow. Do you think it's because I'm hitting the key too fast or too often? This is really painful, isn't it? All right, so about 6 weeks after go live, and to Eric's question, is there one key takeaway? Well, there was more than one, right? Well, so about 6 weeks after go live, the change management team actually led this effort. We went around and interviewed all the business project leaders and all the executives and said, what went well? What could we have done better? This was the outcome. And, you know, at the risk of repeating myself, some of the things that really came out were, number one, it was number one. It was the only thing we focused on. We slowed down or stopped other projects. This was so important to the success of the company. We don't always have that luxury, right? But I think it's an important lesson learned. If you've got something that's really important, maybe you should like back off some of the other stuff. I'm going to zip through these. That formalized project management structure really facilitated rapid decision making. Those Tuesday morning meetings were really eventful. They were 60 to 90 minutes of, we got to do this, you need to help there, you need to do this, go to that. And it was just a lot of very active. The cross-functional coordination and the planning, that meeting that we had with the 70 folks, everybody pointed to that as a key event that made the project successful. Lessons learned, there's something about data, right? And again, I can't really speak to that because I was dealing with the people side of this. But I think the two things that were big takeaways for me were, number one, we should have had those cross-functional meetings a lot sooner. And the first one we did was on September 7th. We went live on October 28th. do the math, what is that, about 6 weeks, 6.5 weeks, 7.5 weeks? Not very much time to marshal that many people. And then the other thing is that we could have done more to develop the super user base, and that fell back on me. We put super users in place, we defined a role for them, but we didn't really put enough effort into developing them and what they needed to do and how they needed support and that sort of thing. So that was a key lesson learned. So if there was one takeaway, the one takeaway is probably that cross-functional discussion. Yeah. Yep. Every organization deals with some level of dysfunction cross-functionally. And if you can conquer that, again, doesn't matter what kind of a project it is, you're going to be a long way down the road to success. So just to wrap up, and to kind of leverage that, some key takeaways for you and some things you can start doing right now is make sure you have that structure in place. I'm sure you are doing this now. But think about how it's linking back up to the top, whatever the top is, and how you're engaging that sponsor to help with the messaging and the accountability, right? Build a strong change management approach. It's not necessarily about methodology, but I will tell you that discovery early is very important. And change management is more than communication and training, but you can't even do communication effectively if you don't do that discovery. I'm working with a client right now who started their change work by putting together a communication plan, and my question was, so how do you know who to talk to? And what are you going to say to them? We're like, good point, good point. So that discovery work is really important. And then, I sound like a broken record, really focus on opportunities to break down those barriers between functions. All right? So, thank you. I have 3 requests before you take over.
I'm going to take it over.
Oh, okay. 3 requests. One, or actually, wait, 2 requests, sorry. Number 1, I'm going to provide this material to Laura tomorrow when I get back home and can zip it up. This is unscrubbed. What you're going to get tomorrow is unscrubbed. The real people's names and real organizations and real issues, and I would ask you to treat it as such. Yeah, it's 10 years old, but we don't need to wallpaper the freeway with this stuff. But use it to your advantage and to your benefit. My other request is that Ken's here videotaping, and I would really love if 2 or 3 folks would volunteer to give a little testimonial on the value of tonight's program. And if you could just scoot over and say hi to Ken afterwards, I'd really appreciate that. That would help me. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.